She wasn't crying because she was sad, and that was what made the moment so difficult to watch. She was crying because she felt trapped in her own home. I still remember how she sat there in the middle of her living room, looking around slowly, almost as if she were seeing everything clearly for the first time. There were boxes lined along the walls, furniture she hadn't used in years, and drawers filled with things she could no longer even identify. Nothing was out of place, yet everything felt overwhelming. Then she said something that has stayed with me ever since. "I've spent 50 years gathering all this, and now I'm a prisoner to it." That single moment captures something many people experience but rarely put into words. Situations like this don't happen suddenly. They build quietly over time through small, harmless decisions. One item kept for later, one memory held on to, one more thing saved just in case, until eventually the space that once felt comforting begins to feel heavy. Without realizing when the shift happened, your home stops being a place where you can fully rest and starts becoming something you have to manage. There's also a truth that many people don't say out loud. We often convince ourselves that we're keeping these things for our families, believing that one day someone will appreciate them, use them, or value them in the same way we do. But in many cases, that isn't what our loved ones actually want. What they truly want is you, your presence, your time, and the peace you bring into their lives, not a house full of things they will one day have to sort through. So this isn't just about clearing space. It's about creating a life that feels lighter, easier, and more peaceful to live in. As you listen, it's worth asking yourself an honest question. How many of these things are quietly sitting somewhere in your home right now? Some will be easy to recognize, while others may take a little more honesty to admit. One of the most overlooked is what could be called the ghost of your professional identity. I once knew a man who kept his old office ID badge tucked away in a drawer. He had been retired for more than 10 years, yet every so often he would take it out, look at it for a moment, and then place it back carefully, almost as if it still carried meaning. To anyone else, it was just a piece of plastic, but to him it represented something much deeper. It reminded him of who he used to be, the role he played, the respect he earned, and the structure his life once had. When that chapter ended, it wasn't just the job that disappeared. A part of his identity seemed to fade with it, and holding on to those objects became a way of keeping that version of himself alive. Old briefcases, work documents, awards, and plaques that once meant everything now sat quietly on shelves, not because they were needed, but because letting go felt like losing a part of himself. And in some way, you may understand that feeling, because this isn't really about the objects themselves. It's about what they represent and the question they quietly raise. Who am I without this? But there is something important to remember. You are not your old job title, and you are not defined by a position you once held or recognition you received years ago. Those things were part of your journey, and they mattered, but they do not define who you are today. When those items remain in your everyday space, they have a subtle effect. They keep drawing your attention back to a version of your life that is already past, instead of allowing you to fully settle into who you are now. This stage of life is not about holding on to past roles. It is about giving yourself permission to be present, without feeling the need to prove anything. Imagine walking into a space that reflects your life as it is today, a space that feels calm, uncomplicated, and free from the quiet pressure of old expectations. Letting go of those items does not mean you are forgetting your past. It simply means you are no longer carrying it in physical form. You still have the experience, the lessons, and the memories. You do not need objects to validate them. And if that idea feels a little difficult to accept, that's completely natural because the next category is even more personal. This is what I would describe as the burden of potential. Almost everyone has something like this tucked away somewhere. It could be a box of materials for a project that was never completed, supplies for a hobby that began with excitement but slowly faded, or tools that have not been used in years. At some point, these items stopped being useful and quietly became reminders. They represent what you once intended to do, what you hoped to become, or what you believed you would eventually get around to. Each time you see them, even briefly, there is a small feeling attached. It may not be strong enough to disrupt your day, but it lingers in the background, creating a quiet sense of something unfinished. And that is where the weight comes from. Many people hold on to these items because letting go feels like giving up, like closing a door they are not ready to close. But in reality, holding on to them does not keep the possibility alive. It keeps the pressure alive. There is another way to look at it. Letting go does not mean failure. It can simply mean release. Not every plan is meant to be completed, and not every idea is meant to follow you through every stage of life. Some things belong to a different time, and that is not something to regret. It simply means life moved and you moved with it. Keeping unused materials does not preserve your potential. It quietly weighs on you. But when you let them go, something shifts. Your space feels lighter, your mind feels clearer, and that unfinished chapter no longer follows you from room to room. In many cases, those same items can become meaningful again in someone else's hands, someone who has the time and energy to use them now. So instead of seeing them as something you failed to complete, you can begin to see them as something you have already outgrown, and there is a certain peace that comes with that understanding. And as you begin to recognize these patterns, the next category becomes easier to notice. It sits quietly in closets and wardrobes, taking up more space than it should, often going unnoticed for years and blending so easily into your daily life that you rarely stop to question it. In many homes, clothing becomes one of the most common places where this kind of quiet clutter builds up. Not just the clothes you wear every day, but the ones you continue to hold on to for a version of life that no longer exists. Almost everyone has them, even if they don't immediately realize it. These are the outfits that once made perfect sense for a job you no longer have, the shoes that match places you no longer go, and the clothes that belong to a routine, a climate, or even a body that has gradually changed over time. Even so, they remain in the wardrobe, neatly arranged, rarely touched, and slowly taking up more space than they should. The reasons we keep them often sound reasonable. We tell ourselves we might need them one day, or that it's better to hold on just in case something comes up. But when you pause and think about it honestly, you begin to realize how rarely those items are actually used. At its core, this isn't really about clothing, and it's about identity. These pieces often represent a version of life we haven't fully let go of, whether that's a more active routine, a different social environment, a past sense of style, or even a younger version of ourselves. Letting them go can feel uncomfortable, not because of the items themselves, but because it requires us to acknowledge that life has changed. And that can be difficult. But change, especially at this stage, is not something to resist. It's something to work with. Holding on to a closet full of someday clothes doesn't prepare you for the future. Instead, it keeps you slightly disconnected from your present, and your present deserves to be honored. The way you live now, the comfort you need, and the rhythm of your daily life all matter more than holding on to pieces of a life that has already passed. When your wardrobe reflects your current reality, everything becomes easier. Getting dressed feels simple. Your space feels lighter. There's no pressure, no quiet guilt, and no decisions tied to a version of life that no longer fits. There is a quiet kind of clarity that comes from that kind of simplicity. And over time, it makes everyday life feel smoother in ways that are hard to describe, but easy to notice. As you begin to understand this, the next category becomes even more meaningful because it's not just about what you chose to keep, but what was passed down to you. This is where inherited guilt comes in. Most people can picture at least one item like this in their home. It might be a piece of furniture that doesn't quite suit your taste, a set of dishes that requires more care than you have the energy for, or an object that carries history but doesn't bring you any real sense of comfort or joy. The reason these items remain is rarely practical, it's emotional. Letting them go can feel like you are rejecting the person they came from, as though releasing the object somehow means letting go of the relationship or the memory attached to it. Because of that, they stay, not out of love, but out of a quiet sense of responsibility. Over time, that sense of obligation can turn your home into something it was never meant to be, a place that stores other people's lives instead of fully supporting your own. But it's important to remember that the people who gave you these things did not intend for them to become a burden. They gave them in a moment that made sense at the time without expecting that you would carry them indefinitely, especially if they no longer fit your life. Your home should reflect who you are now. Your comfort matters, your space matters, and you are not responsible for preserving everything in order to prove that you care. Memories are not held inside objects. They exist within you. So when something in your home feels heavy every time you see it, that feeling is worth paying attention to. It is not a sign that you should hold on tighter, but a sign that it may be time to let go. Not with guilt, but with understanding. This leads naturally into something that many parents hold on to for far longer than they realize. The collection of items that remain long after children have grown and moved on. These are the boxes filled with school reports, old clothes, small trophies, drawings, and notebooks, each one representing a moment from a time when your home was full of activity, noise, and constant presence. There is no question that these items matter. They represent years that shaped your life in meaningful ways. But there is a question that often goes unasked. If those children are now living their own lives, building their own homes, and creating their own memories, why are these items still being stored in yours? At some point, what began as a way of preserving memories gradually turns into long-term storage, and over time, it begins to take up more space than it should, not only physically, but emotionally as well. Each time those boxes are opened, they pull you back into a chapter of life that has already passed. While there is nothing wrong with remembering, holding on to everything does not strengthen those memories. Instead, it can make it harder to fully embrace the present. Many people come to realize that if these items truly hold meaning for their children, they will eventually come back for them. And if they don't, it doesn't mean those memories are unimportant. It simply means life has moved forward for everyone involved. Choosing a few meaningful items to keep, capturing the rest through photos, and allowing the majority to be released creates a different kind of space, one that honors the past without being weighed down by it. As you begin to let go of these larger emotional categories, it becomes easier to notice smaller patterns that quietly take over your home without drawing much attention. One of the most common is what could be described as the backup of the backup. This is where everyday items begin to multiply beyond what is actually needed. Extra sets of dishes, additional linens, unused pillows, and various items that are kept simply because they might be useful at some point in the future. At first, this feels like preparation. It feels responsible to be ready for guests or unexpected situations. But as time goes on, those situations often become less frequent, while the items themselves remain. They begin to fill cupboards, closets, and storage spaces, gradually making the home feel more crowded and less manageable. What shifts here is not just the amount of items, but the mindset behind them. At this stage of life, the greater concern is not scarcity, but ease. It is about creating a space that feels comfortable, manageable, and supportive of your daily routine. You don't need to be prepared for every possible scenario. You only need what supports the way you live now. When you begin to keep only what you truly use and enjoy, something subtle but powerful happens. Your home starts to feel more intentional, more open, and more aligned with your needs. Daily life becomes simpler, not because you have less, but because what remains is exactly what you need. And as your awareness sharpens, you begin to notice another category that's easy to overlook at first, but once you see it, it's hard to ignore. I like to think of this as the information graveyard. It usually lives in a drawer, sometimes in a box, occasionally spread across different corners of the house, and it's made up of things that once felt useful but no longer have any real place in your life. Old cables you don't recognize anymore, chargers for devices you stopped using years ago, instruction manuals for appliances that are long gone, and small pieces of outdated technology that you kept because it felt safer not to throw them away. Individually, none of these items seem like a problem. They're small, easy to ignore, and simple to push aside. But over time, they begin to collect. And what you're left with is a space that feels slightly chaotic every time you open it, even if you can't immediately explain why. Most people have had that moment where they open a drawer looking for something specific, pause for a few seconds as they scan through the contents, feel a quiet sense of frustration, and then close it again without finding what they needed. It may seem insignificant, but those small moments of friction add up, and they affect how your space feels on a daily basis. The truth is, much of what sits in that drawer belongs to a different time. Technology has changed, systems have become simpler, and the chances that you will suddenly need a random cable from 15 years ago are extremely low. Holding on to these items doesn't prepare you for the future. It simply keeps you connected to things that no longer serve you. When you finally clear that space, the effect is immediate. It's not dramatic, but it's noticeable. The drawer becomes easier to use. Your mind feels less cluttered, and there's a quiet sense of relief that comes from removing something you didn't realize was weighing on you. In a similar way, the kitchen can slowly become another source of hidden clutter, especially when habits from earlier stages of life continue without being adjusted to your current reality. This often shows up in what could be described as a just-in-case approach to food and storage. Many people still shop as though they are feeding a full household, buying in bulk or holding on to extra items because it feels responsible to be prepared. At one point, that approach made perfect sense. But as life changes and routines become simpler, those same habits can lead to overcrowded shelves, expired food, and a kitchen that feels heavier and more complicated than it needs to be. Instead of creating a sense of security, an overfilled pantry often creates the opposite effect. It becomes harder to find what you need, harder to keep things organized, and harder to enjoy the space itself. Cooking, which should feel simple and comfortable, starts to feel like something you have to work around. There is a quiet shift that happens when you move from quantity to intention. Keeping smaller amounts of fresh, useful items changes the way your kitchen feels. It becomes easier to manage, easier to maintain, and far more pleasant to use. The space starts to support your daily life instead of complicating it, and that difference is something you feel every single day. The final area, and perhaps one of the most overlooked, is what we might call the obligation library. These are the books that sit on your shelves not because you love them, but because you feel like you should. Some were bought with good intentions, others were gifts, and some are simply leftovers from a time when you had different interests or more time to read. They remain in your space, quietly taking up room, even though you have no real connection to them anymore. What makes this category unique is that it doesn't just occupy physical space, it also carries a subtle mental weight. Each time you see those books, there may be a small thought in the background reminding you that you haven't read them yet, or that you might get to them someday. Over time, that quiet pressure turns something that should feel enjoyable into something that feels like an unfinished task. Letting go of these books is not about rejecting knowledge or curiosity. It's about recognizing that your time and energy are valuable and that your space should reflect what truly matters to you now. Keeping a small collection of books that you genuinely love or return to creates a very different feeling. The space becomes lighter, more personal, and more aligned with who you are today. When you step back and look at all of these areas together, a pattern begins to emerge. This isn't really about removing random items from your home. It's about understanding the role those items play in your life and deciding whether they still belong there. At some point, the focus naturally shifts. It moves away from holding on to things and toward creating an environment that feels calm, supportive, and easy to live in. The goal is no longer to preserve everything, but to make space for what truly matters in the present. You have already spent decades building your life, gathering what you needed along the way, and creating a home filled with experiences. Now you have the opportunity to shape that space in a way that reflects where you are today, not where you used to be. There is something deeply freeing about walking into a room that feels open and manageable, where everything has a purpose and nothing feels like a burden. It allows you to relax more fully, to think more clearly, and to enjoy your time in a way that is often overlooked. The process does not have to be rushed, and it does not have to be perfect. Even the smallest step, whether it's clearing a single drawer or letting go of a few items you no longer need, creates momentum. Over time, those small decisions lead to a noticeable change, not just in your home, but in how you feel within it. If there is one thing worth holding on to, it is this: your home should support your life, not weigh it down. And the lighter your space becomes, the easier it is to experience that sense of peace that so many people are quietly searching for. And if this made you pause, even for a moment, I'd love to hear from you. Which one of these felt the hardest to let go of? You can share it in the comments, because sometimes putting it into words is the first step toward actually making a change. If you found this helpful, take a second to like the video so more people can see it, and share it with someone who might need this reminder as well. And if you'd like more conversations like this, you can subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. There's also a small way to support the message if it resonated with you. You can tap the thanks or hype button just below the video, which helps push this content to more people who may need it, especially those who feel overwhelmed but don't know where to start. However you choose to engage, just being here and reflecting on your space already means you're moving in the right direction.